Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of Clean Talk, State of Infection Control. I am Pablo Gonzalez, but the star of the show, the host of the show going forward is Brad Whitchurch. Brad, you want to say hello to everybody?
Hello to everybody. How you doing, Pablo?
I'm doing great. Brad, we are next to each other, but looking at a screen, right?
That's right.
I think we want to tell our friends that are watching, Alyssa, Gina, Russell, Scott, welcome to the show. This is the inaugural episode. We're going to talk about this new initiative that Clean Talk is and Seal Shield is launching to create this community around infection control in order to serve the needs of the healthcare community and infection control at large. Brad, why don't you start us off telling us what brought you into infection control? What brought you wanting to solve for this issue?
Well, it really happened organically, Pablo. My background is I've been in IT sales and marketing my whole career. And back in the early 2000s, I had a manufacturer's rep firm, and we sold a handful of products into major big box retailers, retail. And companies like CompUSA and Circuit City, companies you don't hear a whole lot about anymore. But I was approached by a company out of the UK that had a washable keyboard that they wanted to launch in the US consumer market. And the idea was you're eating your breakfast, you spill your coffee on the keyboard, you can go rinse it out in the sink, and you're back in business. So I went and presented this product to all the big retailers, and literally the worst reception I've ever gotten to a product. I practically got thrown out of CompUSA. No marketing funds, one product company, shrinking shelf space for the category, and it looked like it was a non-starter. That same week, there was a front page article in the USA Today quoting a University of Arizona study that found that the average computer keyboard has 400 times more bacteria than a toilet seat. And it was a slow news week. It was picked up by all the major news networks. And my whole career in IT sales, I'd never seen anything like it. My phone just started ringing off the hook from hospitals, which I had never done anything in healthcare. And all these hospitals wanted to evaluate this washable keyboard. It was very exciting. We sent out about 600 evals that first week. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that product failed everywhere. It was not engineered for healthcare needs, for the infection control needs. It couldn't be submersed. It couldn't be cleaned with bleach or healthcare disinfectants. But it was obvious. If we can make a keyboard that's dishwasher safe, self-sanitizing, and meets the rigors of infection control for healthcare, that we would have a real opportunity. And that's what we did. I got together with several friends. And in 2007, we launched the world's first dishwasher safe keyboard and mouse. And that product was immediately successful in healthcare. And within a couple of years, we were really well known as the waterproof keyboard company. But we realized it has nothing to do with waterproof keyboards, that these keyboards are being demanded for a very specific problem that hospitals are trying to address, and namely that is hospital-acquired infections. Pablo, a lot of people don't realize that as many as 2 million people a year are the victims of a hospital-acquired infection in the US. That's just a US stat. And what that means is that 2 million people go to the hospital seeking healthcare, and they can track something that they didn't have before they went there. And as many as 100,000 people die in the US from an infection they received in a US hospital, and as many as 800,000 are left permanently disabled every year. And that really became our mission. That it started with the washable keyboards, but there are other vectors that need to be addressed in healthcare to keep a clean, safe environment. And that really became our mission, that we wanted to prevent infections and save lives. And everyone in this company has a personal story. And we have people come up to us at trade shows all the time with those statistics. A lot of people have been affected by this really quiet pandemic of hospital-acquired infections. And of course, now with COVID, there's much greater awareness. But that's how we found ourselves in the healthcare business and in infection control. It started with an IT product that turned into almost a religion. We're very serious about our mission. We know that as many as 70% of these hospital-acquired infections, according to the CDC, are preventable. We like those odds, and we're doing our part.
So it starts with an opportunity, right? You're selling widgets to computer nerds, right? And you see an opportunity in a market which seems like it was a financial incentive, financial opportunity, but then it evolves into much more. You start to understand the breadth of this problem, the scope of it, the impact you can create, which, spoiler alert, that's why we're here, right? Like this very solvable healthcare system problem. Saving lives, saving costs of an overburdened healthcare system is very, very solvable if we can knock this chunk off, right? And relieve a burden from it. And that is the mission of this content stream, is to inform the healthcare industry, any parties involved, people that want to sell into it, people that have careers within it, that can recognize this opportunity as a place to make an impact and as a place to make a career out of it, right? And grow something really, really meaningful, which you've done with the company. I'd love to find out. I know now that everybody has a story within infection control, but when you first went into it as a IT vendor and article comes out and you start selling these things like hotcake, at what point did it start really dawning on you the scope and the impact of where healthcare is right now, this giant problem with hospital acquired infection controls, and the fact that it is actually solvable, and how you started really buying into that as a mission as opposed to the initial business opportunity?
Well, right. That's exactly how it evolved. It started out as an IT product opportunity. And as we started offering these products and realizing the success, but also the impact, we gained greater awareness over the actual problem. It isn't that people need to get keyboards wet. It's that it's a common cross-contamination point, and it's leading to cross-contamination infections in hospitals. And as we started moving forward with this product, like I said, we'll be at trade shows and people come up and tell very personal, very heart-wrenching stories about experiences they've had or a loved one has had in the hospital. And they would tell us how great a thing we were doing. And it was probably about a couple of years after we started the company, which we founded in 2006, that it really dawned on us, we're not in the washable keyboard business at all. We're in the infection prevention business, and we have a responsibility to be innovating technologies that continue to support a solution to this problem, because it is a solvable problem. And even though it's a solvable problem, it's a problem that's getting worse. In fact, this year, during the COVID year, hospital-acquired infections, which had been dropping slightly over the last few years, are back up on the rise. And when you hear the personal, real horror stories from the people that have experienced a hospital-acquired infection, you realize that you're dealing with something that, as I said, has nothing to do with washable keyboards. And since then, we've leveraged the success of the keyboards and mice to really become leading innovators and technology experts around infection control solutions. And we went from being strictly an IT sales and marketing company to being an infection control prevention company and developing those innovative solutions. We have a number of PhDs on staff. We have clinicians on staff, nurses, people with expertise in the field, and we're really pushing the technology innovation. We're one of the leading innovators in infection control. It started with washable keyboards, which turned into broader washable electronics. We began implementing antimicrobial additives into our products back in 2007 and gained great expertise in antimicrobial science. We've recently shifted into the UV space, which is very promising. We have the leading solution for UV disinfection for mobile devices. And so what started out as very much a product play has really turned into a mission of innovation and leveraging expertise to come up with new solutions to help solve this significant problem in healthcare.
I find it fascinating. I find the idea that you can find a solvable problem and an opportunity like that can create such an impact that has this really tangible benefit to human life, just a really exciting endeavor. And I think about when you entered this thing, right? It's 2006, pre-iPhone, right? I'm sure you were probably wearing a BlackBerry on your clip, right? Like, what did, and you were selling.
Some of our folks still are. Shout out to Scott.
There you go, Scott. What did you said you came in and it was about 2 years in, you started realizing the opportunity. What did the industry look like at that point? Was there CMIOs that were already thinking infection control? Was it like a buzzword that hit the scene? Were there a lot of people providing keyboards? I would imagine at that point, there's a lot of desktop computers, a lot of laptop computers, very different panorama than where we're at now. I'd love to kind of like paint the picture of what the industry looked like then, what the statistics were, what the perception of the problem and the perception of what the solution might be to kind of have a baseline to kind of show this track record of innovation and opportunity that I think we're going to be presenting a lot of opportunity to people that are kind of understanding this thing as they follow along this content stream.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, Pablo. We're really excited about this platform. It's a platform that's been needed for infection control for a long time so that practitioners can share best practices, technology innovators can bring on new solutions, and we can continue to improve in this area. And ultimately, I believe that hospital-acquired infections can be largely overcome in the future using technology. And when we started this business, there was awareness of hospital-acquired infections, but it was the dirty little secret of hospitals. And really, it was that University of Arizona study that sparked the whole awareness around keyboards. And then there were follow-up studies. University of North Carolina, Dr. Bob Rutala tested keyboards at the University of North Carolina Medical Center and found that on average, 25% of those keyboards tested positive for MRSA. That's the superbug. It's hard to kill, but it will kill you. And that really spawned the awareness. We were the initial players in the category. We invented the world's first dishwasher safe keyboard and mouse. So there was no market. But as I said, when the solution was presented, there was immediate interest in the product. But we had to evangelize it for years and with our partners' help, because the hospitals really didn't even realize that this solution was available. And then over time, as that awareness has grown, it becomes almost an afterthought. When they're doing a PC configuration, they're already thinking, hey, what is the infection control keyboard solution I'm using? And of course, that's Seal Shield. So there was a no market. We had to build it. We had to get the awareness around the technology. And of course, we've improved the technology over time, adding antimicrobial benefits, offering both washable or antimicrobial solutions historically, and then using that same technology to develop other products. We have a line of screen protectors, which do not compete with consumer grade screen protectors that you can buy on Amazon or any website. They're custom cut, large format, or custom cut to medical equipment such as infusion pumps. And they solve another problem in hospitals, that they protect those devices from harmful cleaning solutions. And another dirty little secret of hospitals is that every hospital has a room with at least $100,000 worth of equipment that they damaged cleaning it. And infusion pumps in particular have a 200-page cleaning manual telling them how to clean the infusion pumps. And then on the last page, it says, don't clean the screen. Well, that's the touch point. And there's infusion pumps that you can't see the screen on, stored in closets in hospitals all over the country. So our antimicrobial screen protectors were developed to help protect medical equipment from harmful disinfectant chemicals, as well as UVC disinfection, UV radiation. And that's another emerging technology. So we see it happening again and again. There's been a huge upsurge in UV as a viable disinfection method, but that comes along with challenges as well that the market's beginning to become aware of. Not all UV is the same. You want a narrow spectrum UV solution. And we developed the electroclave, which uses UVC light to disinfect mobile devices. Well, much like our experience with the keyboards, people hadn't thought about the problems around mobile devices. That's an afterthought. And as EMR systems like Epic and Cerner have become mainstream in healthcare, those are highly mobile-centric solutions. So not only are they buying the software and implementing it, they're buying hundreds, if not thousands, of iPhones for the practitioners to use. What they didn't consider was, in doing so, they've become more effective and more efficient at their jobs. But the cell phone has been said to possibly be the most dangerous device in hospitals, because the cell phones are traveling to areas of the hospital that aren't touched by other equipment. They're going everywhere in a doctor's pocket or with the nurse, and those devices need to be disinfected. And it's a hard to clean device. You can't just throw it in the dishwasher. And that's where UVC disinfection becomes ideal. And that's how that product materialized. And when it came out, people weren't aware of it. People weren't starting to use UV light yet. Now it's becoming more mainstream. There's more awareness, not only of the solution, but of the challenges. And of course, we continue to try and address that and push the envelope on innovation.
There seems to be an ongoing theme that is problem that seems that you just need to accept, to solution, to then new problem, to solution, to new problem, to solution, right? So I'd love to I'd love to dissect how the awareness of this stuff becomes, right? Is it right in thinking that before 2006, before this started really, taking off, I imagine 2006, it's a laptop or a computer in front of me, and how you're describing your solution evolution, which sounds fantastic, right? Solution evolution. You go from protecting, it's protecting the things that you touch, right? So you're talking about keyboards and mice. That seems very much like laptop and computer solution. Then you're talking about screen protectors, which sometime late in the 2000s, touch screens started hitting on laptops and on bigger tablets, right? Before the iPad really happened, that was already kind of happening in commercial applications. And that's the need for a screen protector. And then now there is this need for UV light, because you now have everybody carrying around their own personal touchable screen that has everything that a laptop would need. And, the way that evolves seems to me like the cycles that you're going to go through in this industry, right? As technology evolves, it solves one thing, but it creates another one.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that was very much the experience with the keyboards. We had to evangelize that early on. We gained market space and awareness, and then the technology pivots, right? Now we're using cell phones. And by the way, the keyboard and mouse business is still very robust. It's a multi-billion dollar business worldwide. Overall in the industry, people are still using desktop computers, and they're still using desktop computers in healthcare, and our keyboard and mouse business continues to grow. However, as you mentioned, new technologies have come out. They're using more and more mobile devices. Well, you don't use a keyboard with a mobile device. So how do you protect that device, and how do you innovate a solution that can do just that? And that was really the inspiration for both the screen protectors and the electroclave disinfection system. And I talked about how we really migrated from being the waterproof keyboard company to being an infection control company. And you talk about the product innovation. One of the things we did that has been key for our product innovation is about a decade ago, we established a healthcare advisory council. So we have leaders from major healthcare systems, both in infection control, IT administration, and clinical, that we meet with at least once a year. And it's become very much a collaborative process. So whereas nobody knew about the problem with keyboards and we invented the keyboard, because we've continued to do innovation, we are now recognized as an innovator. And so now the healthcare systems want to know, what are you working on next? What's coming next? And we want to know from them, what are your problems? What can we help solve? And so that's been a really collaborative approach that's led to our development. That's been directly critical in the development of the electroclave in particular. We found out things that it's not just about the UV disinfection of those devices, but how do you track those devices? Why is that important? Well, it's important for a lot of reasons. One, IT has a problem to solve. They've implemented 1,000 iPhones, and the first year, half of them are gone. They've walked off site. Nobody knows what happened to them. You could probably find them on eBay. So by being able to track those devices, you can manage them from an asset management standpoint for IT. But more importantly to our mission, you can actually make data-driven decisions around infection prevention. You can actually make sure that every individual is disinfecting their device on a schedule. And so the electroclave offers RFID tracking for all the devices that it interfaces with, and it can be managed through a single cloud portal. That was not the initial idea of the device. It was a UV disinfection device. And our healthcare advisory council say, what we really need is need to be able to track these devices, manage to an infection control protocol, and then be able to pass a JCO audit. So if they get audited by the Joint Commissions, the first thing that the Joint Commissions does, they come in and say, you have an infection control plan? They say, yes, we do. They say, what is it? Prove it. And so it's not good enough just to be able to clean the device. You have to be able to demonstrate that you clean the device on an acceptable interval to help prevent infections. And so all of those features really came directly from our healthcare customers through that advisory council, telling us what the problems they had, the challenges they had, and then we go about trying to solve those problems. And that's really the formula for success, at least for Seal Shield.
And again, the reason why we are starting this content stream, why we're starting this community, to increase that feedback loop, not just Seal Shield to community, but amongst yourselves and amongst the industry at large, in order to inform that process. We're going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point, Pablo. You know, we're talking a lot about Seal Shield today, but the mission of this platform is in line with our mission for infection prevention. Our goal is to have this be an agnostic platform. I welcome our competitors. I welcome other innovators. I welcome practitioners, people with expertise in the field. We want to really have an open forum that can benefit the community towards our goal of infection prevention.
Awesome. Yeah. And I saw you do that in person at HIMSS, right? Like I know that a couple of the competitors came up to the booth, you had an open conversation, put them on the interview thing, right? So this is an absolutely collaborative platform. So let's switch the focus, right? We've been talking a lot about the product and the solution itself. Let's talk about the people that are tackling this problem. How has the evolution of the person carrying the bag of infection control happened, right? Like in 2006, was it IT guy just all of a sudden this problem got dumped on his or her desk? And now who is carrying that responsibility, and what do you see in the industry of best practices as a role, and who carries it and how it works effectively?
Yeah, let me take a step back. And I didn't plan on telling this story, so I may butcher it a little bit, but I can tell you about the origins of infection control to start. And there's an individual named Ignaz Semmelweis, who is considered the father of infection control. And I believe it was the 16th century. He was a Hungarian physician practicing in Vienna. And at that time, there was an issue in hospitals that when you went to give birth, you could go to the hospital or you could go to a midwife, and the hospitals had a huge mortality rate for newborns. So they had over 10% mortality rate for newborns, whereas the midwives had about half that. And this bothered Semmelweis. As a man of medicine, he was concerned, how can the midwife have more success than us learned doctors? And he started doing some research. And at the time, there was no concept of infection control. The body was controlled by the 5 humors, and any talk outside of that was almost blasphemy. Semmelweis watched and viewed doctors doing autopsies and then turning around and delivering babies, and then going back and doing autopsies. There was no hand washing. There was no washing of instruments. And he theorized there was some invisible force that happened between the autopsy and the birth. And so he started studying this, and he came up with the idea of disinfecting equipment and washing hands, and had just a tremendous turnaround and became the safest way. Birthing mothers would come to just that one hospital because they were the only hospital with a low birthing rate. And his fellow physician said to him, Semmelweis, this is incredible. This is game changing. You have to present this to the medical board. Well, Semmelweis was Hungarian. He didn't speak the language very well. And when he presented his findings to the board, they ridiculed him. In fact, they thought he was insane, and they committed him to an asylum. And within a week of arriving at the asylum, he cut his finger with a pair of scissors and died of an infection. That's a true story. That was the first awareness that cleaning and disinfecting can have a positive effect against cross-contamination infections. Now, today we know that the body isn't controlled by the 5 humors, and we take it for granted that you wash your hands, certainly in a healthcare environment, that all the equipment is sterile. But the only reason it's ended up that way is because of Ignaz Semmelweis. Now, you asked about who's carrying the flag for infection control today. Well, every hospital has a dedicated infection control person. It might be a lead nurse. It could be an infection control director. The title varies, but they all have one person. In many cases, that person doesn't have a lot of power. In most cases, they have no budget, but they're an influencer. So they try to keep the hospital on track with best practices for infection control. One of the ways that Seal Shield has been successful is that all of our infection controls also have an IT component. In the hospital, IT has budget. So IT needs solutions such as keyboards and mice, but they have not the decision maker, but a champion, an influencer in an infection control person that's telling them, hey, if you're going to get a keyboard and mouse, get one that helps to solve our problem. And so there's an initiative in every healthcare system to improve infection rates usually by driving, hand washing, hygiene, or also by implementing these solutions. So it's a very low cost upgrade for IT to solve the problem of infection control. But it's usually those two departments, at least in the case of Seal Shield, infection control being the influencer and IT having the budget. And I think now because of COVID, we're seeing for the first time budget actually dedicated to infection control. A lot of that budget is being slotted for PPE, but there's a lot more opportunity to improve infection control initiatives with the technology that has emerged just over the last decade.
Super interesting. Okay. So then it's somebody that's overseeing the initiative of infection control that generally doesn't have a budget. And then it's figuring out a way where budget is allocated that you can provide infection control into an already existing purchasing decision. You talk about IT, right? So IT makes sense because it's the touch points. And then you talked about PPE, right? So that's bringing in the contaminants. So I would imagine PPE is kind of how you limit the contaminants coming in, and then the IT stuff controlling it is limiting the spread of one contaminant from one person to another. Are there other departments or other procurement decisions outside of IT or outside of PPE that could be affected by infection control? Is it like the sanitation department, like, the maintenance department? Are there any other buckets where infection control may have a back end solution?
Absolutely. Janitorial has been ratcheted up. They're using solutions that are healthcare grade for disinfecting hard to kill pathogens. So there's been evolution there. We see a lot in the biomed department where they can have contamination of sampling and they need to have a clean environment. So with Seal Shield, all of our products provide both an infection control benefit and an IT benefit, but it isn't just driven through IT. And wherever there's an opportunity to implement an infection prevention initiative, in the healthcare, they have a charter to do what's best for the patients and the practitioners. And so they're really responsible for looking for new innovations that are going to help improve patient outcome and ultimately save money or increase profitability for the healthcare system. But first and paramount is the health of the patient and the health of the practitioner. And so it's an initiative at every level. There's a lot of solutions that can be funneled in through a lot of different paths.
Are these infections, are these statistics that you're talking about? You're talking about the health of the patient and the health of the practitioner. When you first mentioned it, I was just thinking the patient. Are these infections affecting staff as well? Are they part of that statistic as well?
Oh, of course. And, we're really seeing it during COVID. There have been some, tragic, well-publicized stories of practitioners contracting COVID and dying. So, when you go into a hospital, especially if you go into the ICU, I'm always struck by the level of people and what kind of a person takes on that job, because you're facing unspeakable horrors on a daily basis, and you're putting yourself at risk for something that you think is greater, which is helping your fellow members of society. And I just have so much respect for those clinicians, particularly in the ICU, where they're seeing those kind of horrors, and they're putting themselves at risk every day to provide service to the rest of us.
So they're putting themselves at risk of infections, right? Of being affected by this stuff. And it seems like they're being given tools to make their life easier, to help lives, right? To help heal people and help bring people back from whatever is ailing them. And these tools bring with them an extra responsibility, right? Like, is this infection control? It seems like the responsibility ultimately lies on the person that is at the forefront, but it's being managed from somewhere else. Or how is it being orchestrated? If there is the point person that cares about infection control, how does that information and how does best practices and how does all that stuff, from what you've seen in the market, what is the best way to get that information and get those best practices to provide the safety for the practitioner and for the, what's the flow of information and tools and budget that you've seen?
Well, it isn't easy, right? Because the innovation moves so quickly. And, there's so many touch points in the hospital. We call them vectors of infection, right? So the keyboards and mice are one, that's a common touch item, but everything else you touch is a potential path to contracting an infection, whether it's the tabletop or the chair, the floors, the walls. And then the air is a big issue as well. And I'll give you a perfect example kind of as to what you're asking, that the air technology has changed so much that the standards in healthcare are based on positive pressure and HEPA filtration. But we know today that the HEPA filters aren't catching the pathogens that they're concerned about. C. diff, MRSA, they blow right through those HEPA filters, and all the HEPA filtration and positive pressure in the world isn't going to eliminate those pathogens from the air system. And yet those healthcare systems are compliant because the compliance is based on old technology. And this is what we're always chasing. So you have to innovate and educate and build that awareness, and then in many cases appeal to the regulatory body that is managing that practice based on historical factors that may not be true today. It's everyone's responsibility in the healthcare system, and you will often see from the CEO down. In fact, the CEO is often making the initiative, and the low-hanging fruit typically is to drive hand hygiene. So we want to make sure that we're using more hand hygiene, more hand washing stations, and they can see that correlation and how that's effective when that's driven through management down to everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility. The problem is that even if your hands are clean, when you touch a dirty device, then your hands are almost instantly infected with whatever was on that device. And there have been numerous studies that demonstrate this, specifically in use with mobile devices. So you can have a great hand washing protocol, and then you check your phone and it's completely negated. So if you're investing in hand hygiene, you need to make additional investments to maintain that investment of hand hygiene. If you're not disinfecting the common touch items, you're really wasting your hand hygiene budget. So initiative from the top, budget coming from various departments, but then making sure that you're getting the best ROI on that budget is where innovation comes in. You got to innovate and educate.
Makes a lot of sense. We've mentioned COVID a couple of times, and it seems like COVID may have been a double-edged sword for this, right? It sounds like it raised the awareness level, but it also greatly raised the stakes of everything that's happening, right? You want to kind of talk about the effect that COVID has had in infection control from your standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're all COVID fatigued. People are tired of being quarantined and tired of wearing masks, and got to go get a shot and all those things. But from our standpoint, it has brought much greater awareness to something we've been talking about for a very long time, where there was not a lot of awareness. And so now everyone is hyper conscious about cleanliness as it relates to their personal situation. What we saw as a company as a result of COVID, we went from being probably 98% healthcare to seeing other vertical markets. So we're fulfilling restaurants, hospitality. We even have some casinos, prison systems, police stations. So all kinds of vertical markets outside of healthcare that we never had exposure to before. So from that standpoint, there's greater awareness in the community, which also helps to drive greater innovation to solve those problems.
That makes a lot of sense. Did I hear that the downside of it for the healthcare industry, outside of the burden and all this, but infection control related specifically, because of COVID, infections in other areas went up? Is that a true statistic? I heard something like that recently.
Yeah, so that's right. Actually, hospital-acquired infections this year, for the first time in several years, have ticked up in the wrong direction. They have increased as a result of COVID. And people are more immunocompromised when they're hospitalized with COVID, so they're more susceptible to these infections. You're putting more people through an already taxed healthcare system, which means that there's going to be greater opportunity for more infections. And because the healthcare system is so taxed, things that do fall off the plate, as crazy as it sounds, can be janitorial and custodial services, because all of the emphasis is being put on managing these infections, these COVID infections. And in fact, you hear the stories about the hospitals that are really struggling financially right now because they can't perform the operations that are profitable for them. They can't do the day-to-day business, and they're dealing with nothing but COVID, particularly here in Florida. Our Florida healthcare system has been heavily taxed, and it's having a negative impact. And the data shows that for the first time in a number of years, hospital-acquired infections are also on the rise.
Interesting. So overall awareness is increasing. It's opening up other verticals. In the meantime, healthcare systems are suffering because of this overburdening and having to devote resources. As somebody that is in the practice, right? I'm a healthcare professional. I'm lead nurse. I'm a CMIO. Are are people within healthcare starting to get hired outside of hospitals and outside of these big healthcare systems based on their expertise in infection control? Is that starting to happen also across different verticals?
You know, I'm not sure about that. There's definitely a greater focus, but as I said, every hospital has someone who's in charge of infection control. I'm not sure we're seeing that in the broader community yet. So I don't see the hotel systems putting ahead of infection control, but I could be wrong. That may be something they're looking at now that hasn't emerged to my eyes.
Well, maybe it's not the hotel systems, right? But for example, you've hired people that are practitioners on your staff, right? Because they come with the experience of knowing this stuff. You want to kind of talk to me about your thinking through of how you're hiring healthcare practitioners to then serve another need within the community and serve the role differently?
Yeah. So, like I said, when we started, we were the waterproof keyboard company. And then once we realized we were an infection prevention company and we're buying into that mission and how valuable and important that work is, then you start looking at your staff and say, well, how can we be better at that? And so you bring in people, PhDs in chemical engineering, antimicrobial experts, UV experts. We brought in clinicians. And as you've said, we've repurposed some of these people into roles within the company. So we have several folks in sales that have a clinician background. And that wasn't something that we did in the past. You don't necessarily need a clinician background to sell a keyboard. But if you want to solve the problem of infection control, infection prevention in hospitals, having a clinician calling on the hospitals has proved to be very fruitful for us and beneficial to the customer. They're speaking the same language, they understand each other's problems, and our Seal Shield employee is a credible source of information. So it's worked out very well for us and was really the natural step in our mission of preventing infections. We want people with expertise. We're innovating new solutions. We're trying to solve a problem that hasn't been solved yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe then as this new post-pandemic world, which will likely lead to more pandemics, right? Like upping your level of expertise and being a clinician and having this kind of like background is probably going to open more worlds as we all get more educated, right? Like the idea of I can become a infection expert on YouTube in an hour, that didn't exist before, right? So I think as CEOs and other people start finding that stuff, it's gonna lead to opportunities of these expertise. It looked like you were gonna say something there.
Yeah, so I have to laugh because it's just like you said, right now, everybody's an infection control company, right? You're making alcohol in your mom's basement and now you're the infection control business. And so our president was saying now when he goes to cocktail parties and he used to tell people he was an infection control, and now he says I'm an infection control, but I've been doing it for 15 years. So yeah, there is a lot of people materializing into the industry looking for opportunities and looking for solutions.
That's true. That's true. I know my brother-in-law is like a higher up in Bacardi. They started making tons of hand sanitizer during the pandemic and stuff
Is that
like
why
that.
you smell like Bacardi right now?
Is that what it is? Brad, talk to me about how do you get people to unite under a mission, right? Like one of the biggest things that has been a major eye opening to me is this problem as a problem, right? Like I had no idea it existed as I got more and more involved in Seal Shield. But B is this really tangible culture that you have built. And I have to assume that if you really want to solve a problem that you care deeply about, this idea of creating culture and getting people to enroll in a mission and being a team and really, really caring about something bigger than themselves is a paramount skill set that anybody in healthcare could stand to learn from. So I would just love to kind of hear from you how you approach this like culture building stuff and how you approach team building.
Well, I appreciate that, Pablo. It's a subject I love talking about. I think we only have about 20 minutes left, so I'll keep it short. I could talk about this all day. Like I said, we got into the waterproof keyboard business, and turns out it doesn't have anything to do with keyboards. It's really all about people, whether it's our customers or whether it's our employees. And here at Seal Shield, we're very fortunate. I've worked for a lot of companies in the past, and I know that we have something special here, and our employees feel it too. It starts with a powerful mission. We're all drinking that Kool-Aid that we're doing something meaningful and important. It's different from other jobs where you're just cashing a paycheck, punching a time clock. We really feel like we're making a contribution, and that unites us all. In addition to that, when I started this company, based on my experiences working at both small and large companies, I really had an ideal of wanting to create a company that I would want to work for. And with that in mind, we really have created an employee-centric culture that now we have developed into just an animal that's just so amazing and rare, and I'm so proud of. And as you know, it starts with our ownership thinking culture. We call it ownership thinking culture. It comes from the book by Brad Ham's Ownership Thinking. And at the heart of ownership thinking, you have education, full transparency, and profit sharing. And I've told you this story before. I'll share it with our listeners here today. Brad Hams, who wrote the book Ownership Thinking, which I highly recommend, was hired to be the CEO of Mrs. Fields in Mexico. So Mrs. Fields, the cookie lady, took her company public, and they started outsourcing the manufacturing to Mexico, and the company tanked. Their profitability, they were struggling with solvency, and they hired Brad to go solve the problem. And he went off to Mexico. And as he researched the issue, what he found was that there was a huge disconnect between the factory workers on the line and the company's financial objectives. And he theorized that if I can train these factory workers in Mexico to read basic financial statements, give them a regular scorecard with full transparency, and give them a profit sharing incentive, that we can get aligned in our goals and turn the ship around. And that's exactly what happened. So Brad Hams trained all of these Mexican factory workers on how to read financial statements. They set up weekly full transparency, open scorecards of the financial objectives, and they provided a profit sharing goal to those workers. The business turned around and became an extremely successful multinational organization. Well, Brad was so excited with what he found, he wrote the book and applied it to other companies. And we embraced ownership thinking about 10 years ago and have really taken it on as our own and evolved it to be our own. But just like with Brad Hams, everyone that gets hired meets with the CFO and gets a full training on basic financial statements. We reinforce that annual to our whole company on a weekly all call, which whether you're in the office or working remotely, everyone participates every week. And we have full open book, transparent financials every week. So we review the sales numbers every week, and then monthly, we look at the profitability for the month and how it applies to the ownership thinking bonus pool. So everyone has a profit sharing stake in the company, which has been very lucrative for all the employees, but you can't have a profit sharing plan if you don't have full transparency. So everyone is really in the same boat in terms of the communication within the company. We took it a step further and we issued equity to everyone in the company. Everyone that works at Seal Shield has an equity stake in the company, either through options or warrants or shares, but everyone has an equity stake, so we're all in the same boat. And then a big important part of ownership thinking is having the right people. And so we are obsessed with attracting and retaining the very best people. And we do that through having the very best benefits program. We pay 100% of our employees' insurance, including the deductible and the regular payments. We also maximize everyone's HSA plan, so everyone gets that tax-free benefit. And we give an annual presentation on how to be an HSA millionaire. We have a 401k plan, but unlike most companies that do a match, we don't do match. We do a 4% contribution. So everyone is in the 401k plan, and we encourage you to invest more and get those time value of money. And we give that presentation every year as well, how to be a 401k millionaire. We have 15 paid holidays a year, which is excessive. The most popular is Super Bowl Monday, very popular here with the troops. And we have a flexible work plan, and we're very engaged with our employee development. So we have education reimbursement, and we have a professional development program where people in the company can get points for doing the training that's required for their job, but also for taking on additional growth and development projects. They get points for that, and they can redeem those points on the Seal Shield catalog store for all kinds of Seal Shield swag. We really are focused on our culture. We do a lot of events to build the culture. Every year we take a Caribbean cruise with the whole company, and we'll bring in an outside expert and initiate a new innovation or new process within the company, new focus, and we'll drive on that for the year. And then we do a lot of fun events. We've done go-kart racing and wine tastings and chocolate making, and we really try to keep everyone engaged. And that's where the magic happens, because we don't just like what we're doing, we like working with each other, and that flows over into everyday life. And we're all working together to achieve an important goal towards our important mission to prevent infections and save lives.
Super Bowl Monday as a holiday is the biggest no-brainer in the history of mankind, right? Like who works on Super Bowl Monday anyways, right? It's such a wasted day. I think that's genius, man. As I'm hearing you say this, obviously you know how I feel about this, right? Like my brain is like, how can I implement this in my company? If I think of myself as a unit leader inside of a healthcare system, right? If I am head clinician, or if I'm the head of IT and I want to implement ownership thinking, I'm looking at a couple of these things. And I hear you say training on financials, giving people a piece of the pie, driving culture, driving experiences, over delivering on the things that you can provide. As the head of a unit, how could I implement little bits of ownership thinking into just leading my own little unit? I may not be able to provide people with extra bonuses, and I may not be able to give them extra holidays, but how would you approach it if you were the chief medical infection control officer, or in charge of infection control, or in charge of an OR, or something like that, where you are just trying to empower people to think like owners and really care about infection control, or whatever else it is, an initiative that you really, really care about within your hospital?
Yeah, it's not one Band-Aid. I don't think it's a toe in the water kind of situation. Everything builds on itself. So you really have to be able to establish that base. First of all, you have to have credibility and trust. That's why you have the full transparency. You want to be aligned in your goals. That's why you share in the profits. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners feel like that's just taboo. I mean, you don't give away the profits, and you don't tell anybody what the profits are. You've got to get over that objection. And that's when you see the magic happen. I think if you're not going to embrace ownership thinking in terms of how it was developed by Brad Hams, there's a lot you can do to improve culture, but they all work together. If you have an important mission, your people are empowered, you've got great people, and you're obsessed with getting more great people and retaining those people. They have the tools they need, the education they need, and they're empowered to make the right decisions. Those are things that any company can embrace, even if you don't want to open up the books and share the profits. You can empower your employees, give them the tools they need, give them the resources they need, and let them do the right thing. And sometimes that's a leap of faith, right? Like walking down the staircase in the dark. You just have to know that that next step is there. And I think it's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners to take that step. But if you are someone that's interested in what you're hearing, I would suggest starting with Brad Ham's book, Ownership Thinking.
Awesome. All right, let's spend the last 5 minutes of this talking about our hopes and dreams for this community, for this content stream. Who do you think we're going to bring on this show? You don't have to say names, but what kind of conversations are we going to be having? What is the final result in a year from now? What does this community look like if everything is going great? And who are we trying to enlist into this mission?
Well, Pablo, I'm trying to figure that out as well, but I've had a little bit of insight. As you know, this is our first live podcast, but we recorded, I believe, close to 30 little mini podcasts at the HIMSS trade show a month ago. And that really opened my eyes to the possibility. Everybody within the community is interested in being a part of this show, because I think there's been such a void in the infection control community for this kind of platform. And that's why I want to make sure that it's agnostic, that it's open up to collaboration. Again, we welcome competitors. We welcome people with expertise in their fields, scientific fields, medical fields, practitioners, clinicians, even on the IT side, administrative side, whether they're healthcare workers, whether they're patients, whether they're technology innovators. This is the platform for people that share our mission of solving this problem around infection prevention.
Love it. What is What do you think we can achieve? What, like in a year, if we succeed, what does it look like? What does the final product look like if we're really doing this? What do you think is possible?
I don't know if it's a final product, but I see the evolution as potentially amazing. We can be driving legislation, we can be driving best practices, we can be driving innovation, we can be making a meaningful and measurable impact towards preventing hospital-acquired infections and cross-contamination infections in general.
Do you think that can be brought down to zero? Is there always going to be some risk of infection? What's a realistic goal of the impact of infections on hospital workers?
Well, my personal opinion is that it cannot be brought down to zero, but it can be brought to close to zero. And the only thing that makes it really difficult to get it to zero is we're severely outnumbered by the bacteria and viruses. And they've been around a lot longer than we have, billions of years on this planet. They're more evolved and continuing to evolve faster than we are. And it's just a monumental problem. However, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We can make major improvements in a rapid time frame. Do we get to zero? I think that would be an unrealistic goal, but can we make a meaningful, measurable impact that has a positive impact on society? Absolutely.
Awesome. And we have a question here from Scott Johnson, who is it, Scott? Let me see. It is Scott. Scott Johnson, who's here live with us. Scott, welcome to the show. This is something we want to drive. We want you showing up as we have more guests and we have people that are talking about their journey that are going to give you insights into what's worked for them in infection control, what the opportunities are, how you can make an impact. We want you coming on the show and asking questions. So Scott, really happy to have you here. And he writes, I'm so glad that I met all of you at HIMSS. Great podcast. Can't wait for the next one. Awesome. Question. How involved are you in developing countries, especially in Africa? Do you guys have any kind of like headways there?
I would say that Africa is our continent of least penetration, but we are doing a lot in the Middle East. We have had some installs in Africa. Typically infection control products have been a luxury for those markets, right? And I believe now with COVID, there's greater awareness and greater acceptance of the cost required to help mitigate these infections. So while Seal Shield has done business in Africa, I think it's safe to say it's the continent where we've done the least business. And I can tell you that historically, there hasn't been a lot of budget from Africa for those kind of solutions. I hope to see that changing.
Is there a region of the world that's doing better or worse in infection control? Is everybody kind of on the same boat?
The US is making strides. We see big strides in the UK and Australia as well, where there's a lot of focus and has been for a while, specifically on hospital-acquired infections. But now let's face it, the whole world has changed. Everyone has the awareness and countries are putting forth all kinds of solutions, all kinds of experiments, and really putting more focus into what they're doing to protect their people.
Awesome. And Scott writes, let's see what we can do to change that narrative. I love it, man. Brad, this has been another really illuminating conversation I get to have with you. The more I learn about this topic of infection control, a couple of things become very, very clear. Number one, it is a much bigger problem than the general population understands. And when you think about it that way, it's a much bigger opportunity than the general population understands. Everything from career paths to products that can come in to innovation to just general type of impact that one can make within this field. When there is such a glaring problem that needs to be fixed, that is at a tipping point of being understood, it really presents these really, really unique opportunities. So I think it's amazing that you're starting this platform. And I hope that those that joined us today will continue to join us. Those are listening to this in the future as a podcast, come to the show. It's going to be live on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. And we want to have you here. You can register via Zoom. What's the best place to contact the show or contact the team if they want to find out more, if they're just hearing this for the first time, Brad?
Well, you can always find us at sealshield.com. We're on all the major social media sites with representation from Seal Shield. And gosh, I don't know, Paulo, this is our first time doing this, so I better get that a little tighter. But we hope to see everybody again next week.
All right, Brad, thanks for this opportunity, man. Give you thank you. Anybody that, if you took an hour out of your day to join us in the middle of a weekday, never take that for granted. The opportunity to provide this value is excellent. So thank you for being a part of this. You're going to be able to drive this show, drive this narrative, drive this community, make the impact that you want to make. Brad, thank you for letting me be a part of this first show. I'm pumped to see you spread your wings as an internet star. And I'll leave you with last words, man.
Well, thanks a lot, Pablo. Appreciate you coming down and doing this for us, and really look forward to developing this platform. I think it's so needed and is going to be a real contributor towards solving the problems associated with infection prevention. And look forward to next week, where our guest will be Don Brisby. And looking forward to having a discussion with him about what the VA Medical is doing to help prevent infections within those systems. Look forward to that.